Welcome to tonight's event on affordable housing. I'm Linda Rice, Vice President for Grant Making at the Hampton Roads Community Foundation. On behalf of Dr. Deborah DeCroce, President and CEO, and the Board of Directors of the Foundation, I thank you for joining us this evening. Did you know that on a recent Tuesday, 4Kids, a nonprofit that operates our region's housing crisis hotline, received 600 calls from persons needing a home that they could afford in one day? That's unprecedented for a day in our region. This evening, we hope that you gain an understanding of affordable housing and who it impacts, and that you gain ways to help improve the issue. This event is part of the Understanding Hampton Roads series, the Foundation's effort to advance civic engagement through forums on key topics to help build understanding, to inspire action, and to bring people together to improve life in our region. Thank you to the Foundation Board of Directors and the government officials who have joined us. Tonight, our speaker is Jonathan Knopf, Executive Director of Programs at Housing Forward Virginia in Richmond. Also joining us for our panel are Steve Lawson of Lawson and Sharnita Bethea from the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. To facilitate the conversation tonight, we have Andy Friedman, Principal at Progressive Housing Solutions, LLC. Our speaker, Jonathan Knopf, leads housing research and education efforts across the Commonwealth for Housing Forward Virginia. His work includes regional and local housing needs assessment, policy generation and implementation, needs, and innovative communication strategies. He specializes in telling stories about Virginia's housing challenges through data and regularly provides technical assistance to local governments, housing providers, and advocates throughout the state. Steve Lawson is a third-generation builder who in 1993 joined the Lawson Companies, a single and multi-family builder, developer, and manager based in Hampton Roads. The company has been active for 50 years in financing, development, and management of single and multi-family housing, serving affordable and luxury clients with consistently excellent service and value. As chairman of Lawson, Steve oversees a portfolio of 5,000 apartments with more than 1,000 new units currently in construction and development. Sharnita Bethea is the Housing and Human Services Administrator for the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. In her capacity, she works with a variety of organizations and agencies to promote regional approaches to issues pertaining to poverty reduction, services for persons with disabilities, the elderly, as well as various affordable housing issues. And Andy Friedman will moderate tonight's conversation. Andy served as the director of the Virginia Beach Department of Housing and Neighborhood Preservation for 28 years until his retirement in 2021. Among his accomplishments is the development and operation of the Virginia Beach Housing Resource Center. Currently, he is the principal and owner of Progressive Housing Solutions, LLC, providing consulting services on affordable housing, homelessness, and neighborhood preservation. The order for tonight's forum is a presentation by Jonathan Knopf, followed by a conversation between Jonathan, Steve, Sharnita, moderated by Andy. Let's get started. Jonathan, thank you for being with us tonight, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Linda, thank you very much for the introduction and again for the opportunity to be here tonight. Looking forward to providing a hopefully brief presentation to lay some of the foundations for our conversation later on with some really great panelists who I am excited that all of you will get to hear from and meet. So for those of you not familiar with us, with Housing Forward, Housing Forward Virginia is a statewide nonpartisan think tank dedicated to advancing housing affordability across the Commonwealth. We conduct research, host and participate in events just like tonight, send out insightful news and analysis, and make a wide range of data freely available and easily accessible on our website, housingforwardva.org. And we're lucky to have a very diverse board that represents all different regions, sectors of the housing industry, and a wide range of experts. And so we have people from our state housing agencies, local governments, regional governments, the home builders, fair housing organizations, nonprofit organizations, the financial sector. And so this allows us to really find good consensus on what works in housing and how to make housing more affordable in Virginia. And luckily, I am joined tonight by two board members, Steve Lawson and Shernita. So they are two of our superstars. And we do work across the state. We're based in Richmond, but I'm often traveling. You can see with all these little dots and lines here that we've done a lot of engagements and a lot of work across the state over the past few years. And we'll talk a little bit later tonight about some work we may have upcoming in the Hampton Roads area. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I really hope to cover four important things. First of all, we need to talk about why there's more to the word affordable and really the word housing than you may think. Next, we're going to talk about why our housing market is broken and why it matters for all of us, even if we don't have our own personal housing problems or struggles that we're dealing with. And so we then obviously need to talk about what some of those causes are, why some of these things are broken, but most importantly, what can we do about it? How can we fix it? And what do some of those solutions look like? And I think that's what a lot of our panel discussion will get into. And finally, and maybe even most importantly, at least for me, we need to talking about housing. You probably talk about it the wrong way right now. I did for a very long time, and I'm still trying to find better ways to talk about housing, but there's lots of great research, really innovative things that are coming out of the fields of psychology and learning how discourse works and what words work and what doesn't, that we can use and deploy when we talk about housing and try to advocate for change to make housing more affordable. So I'll share a little bit of that and then give you all some links to resources to look at on your own. So why are we talking about housing in the first place? Well, it's not really working for everyone right now. And in case you haven't seen, it's getting a little bit harder to notice all of the consequences. And so when our housing market is out of balance and things aren't really working perfectly, funny things can happen like this. So in some places across the country, homeowners have earned enough home equity in their house to match or exceed the average annual household income in their community. So their home is making more money than some of the people that they live next to. And so if you own your home and you already paid it off, or maybe you got one of those great super low interest rates over the past few years and you don't need to move anytime soon, you're probably in pretty good shape. So good for you, just stay put, right? But at the same time, if you're looking for an apartment, maybe you move to Hampton Roads for work, or you have an adult son or daughter coming home from college that wants to live and work near they grew up, trying to find an apartment is harder than ever and more expensive than ever. And so growing demand from people of all ages and all incomes has put pressure on a limited supply. We've been underbuilding housing, both for sale and for rent, for decades now. And we're still struggling with those consequences. And so when fewer units are available, we see historic increases in rents in Hampton Roads and across the state and across much of the country. And to make things worse, housing problems can be tough for some folks to grasp. In fact, a lot of people don't often think about housing beyond their own front door. And so unless you're in the industry and you talk about housing and housing policy and housing affordability day in and day out, you probably haven't considered the big picture, or maybe you just don't feel like you have the right tools to think about the big picture and what exactly is going on. And so you can really only use your immediate experiences trying to rent an apartment, buy a home, help a friend or a son or daughter buy a home, and then whatever you might hear in the news on any given day, which is often out of context and tough to kind of understand, again, at the big picture. So let's begin tonight by grounding ourselves in some of the terms and concepts that you'll probably hear us use to just give us a better language, a better vernacular for talking about housing. And so, like I said, one of the first things we need to do is unpack the word affordable. And so really there is no, and I would argue shouldn't be, a single definition of quote unquote affordable housing, because it's easy to get lost in these semantics and not get any actual work done to improve people's lives. But for now, let's start at the basic household level. This is kind of easier to understand. Just in terms of the pure household budget, housing is affordable when your monthly housing cost, whether it's your mortgage and your rent, plus your basic utilities to stay warm or stay cool and have water and be able to cook, don't exceed 30% of your gross income. This is just a pretty standard way of defining affordable housing that's easy to use with the data we have available from the census and other places. And so this is the most common, easy to use metric that we have at our disposal. And so we in the housing industry say that if you pay more than 30%, you're cost burdened. If you pay more than half of your total gross income on your basic housing costs, you are severely cost burdened. And this means that you've got less money to pay for other basic life necessities like gas, childcare, healthcare, let alone anything that actually makes life kind of fun. So our goal with our policy is to make housing affordable to folks so that they're not paying that much on their home. But I think it's really important also to think about affordability in terms of the community overall. So how well do housing prices match household incomes across a region? What neighborhoods and types of homes are out of reach for some families? And can workers afford to live near where they work? And so since the price of and ability to pay for housing can vary a lot by different regions and different areas, particularly between Northern Virginia and Southwest Virginia, we can establish a reference point using what we call area median incomes, or AMI. So basically what Census and the Department of Housing and Urban Development up in DC do is crunch the numbers and determine what is the right in the middle, the family earning, what is the income for the average family in a given region. And so we can say somebody earning half of that is earning 50% of AMI. And so this is a really important construct for researchers and policymakers. And when we talk about housing programs, generally they're going to be targeted or have eligibility restrictions based on some of those income ranges, because we want our public investments in affordable housing to try to meet the needs of the people who have the greatest needs. So this means what we can do is take this spectrum of incomes, pegging it with the median for a particular region and creating a spectrum of our different housing options and different housing solutions. And so we'll start kind of at the bottom of the spectrum, looking at people with extremely low incomes, below 30% of AMI, people who are probably exposed to or are experiencing some type of housing instability or have no home at all at any given moment. And so thankfully that the population of the persons experiencing homelessness across Virginia has declined over the past 10 years, thanks in large part to greater and stronger investments at the state and local level. But we still have this problem, but we have really good solutions for fixing it. And those include obviously emergency temporary shelters, but also things like transitional housing, rapid rehousing to get people back into permanent homes, supportive housing to provide people services on site to help them overcome mental or physical health challenges they may have. And so we have lots of programs and lots of investments that are deployed locally for people in that income range. We also have programs that are for people who aren't really experiencing housing instability, but just have a very low ability to pay for housing. Somebody who is working a minimum wage job and has 2 children to support and maybe has student loan debt. They really can't afford rent that's $1,500 a month. And so we have a range of public programs like our older public housing stock, housing choice vouchers, other things to help supply those people with additional resources to pay for their rent. And then we have obviously the solutions that aren't subsidized. We have rental homes that what we call market affordable or naturally occurring affordable housing that have no subsidy whatsoever. And they're affordable just because of their location and their condition or quality, maybe not in the most attractive places. And this actually is where most of the low-income renters, the vast majority of them, live. They're not in public housing. They're not in other types of subsidized housing. They are in market rate housing that happens to be less expensive than the new stuff getting built. And so we also have things that programs that reach people between 40, 50, 60 to 80% AMI, things like the low-income housing tax credit, which is the main engine behind affordable rental housing development. I'll show you some pictures of those in a second. We have things at the local level like inclusionary zoning to try to create affordable units within new market rate construction. And so we have lots of ways to reach incomes that aren't super low, and we can do that with less subsidy overall. And then for the home ownership market, which we'll finally get to as incomes go up high enough, we have starter homes and resales available, hopefully, to people who want to achieve home ownership for the first time. We have new for sale homes, which are generally larger and more expensive due to a lot of reasons that we'll talk about a little bit more later tonight, and really aren't accessible to people looking for their first home. But we also have programs supported by public investments and private philanthropic support to provide people with resources to become first-time homeowners, or to improve the condition of the home that they own, to improve the energy efficiency of it, lower their utility bills. And so long story short here is that it's important to imagine this whole spectrum working together. And we need this to work together so that everybody has ample opportunity to find a home that they like and that they can afford in a place where they actually want to live. And so we already have a web of private solutions, public-private solutions, purely public solutions, with a lot of important nonprofit and charitable partners to get this done. So it's not just affordable versus non-affordable. And so what do some of these different types of housing look like, especially the kinds that you may not be familiar with? I think it's important to have accurate images of these in our minds tonight. So I'll start with Heron's Landing in Chesapeake, developed by Virginia Supportive Housing. It's 60 studio apartments for formerly homeless persons, community services built in on site to help residents find permanent housing stability. This isn't free housing, though. Residents pay no more than 30% of their income. There's a minimum rent level that everybody has to pay. And this example in particular is a great example of regional collaboration between localities in Hampton Roads. It's got really great energy efficiency measures, including the solar panels you see on the roof to lower utility bills for all of the residents and for Virginia Supportive Housing. And it's won a bunch of awards too. We also have lots of things like Seaside Harbor in the Virginia Beach resort area, just a few blocks from the oceanfront. So this was developed by Steve Lawson and his team in partnership with Samaritan House, a local nonprofit whose primary mission is to combat domestic violence and human trafficking. So this is an example of a community that uses the low-income housing tax credit, a federal subsidy that flows through our state housing finance agency. So this is something really that most of our new affordable housing, new affordable rental housing will use to get developed and to provide below market rents. And so a portion of these units are set aside for clients with developmental disabilities, with physical disabilities. And yet again, this is another project that has won awards, in this case from the National Association of Home Builders, the State Association of Home Builders, and the Hampton Roads Association of Commercial Real Estate. We have another low-income housing tax credit, or LIHTC, community here. This is Retreat at Harbor Point, also developed by Lawson Companies. And should be no surprise at this point, this one has also won plenty of awards from national and local organizations. And here we see Beach Park West, developed by the Virginia Beach Community Development Corporation. These are homes for people with mental disabilities, and this helps reduce the burden on our state hospitals, and most importantly, gives dignity and independence to these clients. And it saves us tax dollars. The more that we can get folks out of state hospitals, out of those very resource intensive places and into permanent housing, the better it is for everybody. And so here's an example of affordable homeownership. This is Habitat for Humanity of Southampton Roads, 9 homes in Suffolk that they finished in 2018. Each home, single family, detached home, 3 to 4 bedrooms. Average monthly payment here, about $700. Very, very affordable. The homes are sold to families with 0% net interest, no closing cost, and a minimum down payment. And all of the home buyers have to put in sweat equity, which is part of the Habitat model. And so finally, let's look at an example of market affordable housing, or this naturally occurring affordable housing in Hampton. This is Tide Mill Farms. And so I checked the rent rolls as of last week. 1-bedroom apartment going for a little over 900, 2-bedroom going for a little over 1,000. So all in all, pretty affordable, but the vacancy rate is just 1.5%. There is a huge demand for these homes, and it is very, very hard to find homes that are this affordable and are in good condition and near transit and near jobs. And some of these communities are in good shape, like this one. They've clearly put some recent investments here, and they look like great places to live. But others are aging and are in poor quality, and others are seeing significant rent increases. Some of the fastest growing rents are in these market affordable apartments because there's so much demand and so little supply. And that can result in displacement of lower income families. And so, unfortunately, some of those great examples of affordable homes and apartments, they're really the exception and not the norm. So we've got a problem. And so why can't we just add up all the number of people who need affordable housing and then subtract that from the number of affordable homes that we can try to count? Well, the math just really isn't that simple. First of all, everybody needs housing that they can afford. It's not just very low income people. It's you, me, everybody. We need to think again about that full housing spectrum. And affordable doesn't always mean available, accessible, or safe. Just because you're paying a low amount doesn't mean that the home that you're in is in good shape. And finally, homes are fixed in most cases, but people are mobile. People get different jobs. They want to move. They want to get into a bigger home, or maybe they want to downsize. And so our housing challenges are diverse and widespread. And I'll show you some examples of some of the challenges that we face. So let's look first at the disappearing starter home. So we'll look at homes sold in the region over the past few years that were affordable to buyers with no more than 80% of AMI. We've had ballooning demand, very limited supply. And so just like across the state and across the nation, we're seeing the number of homes that are affordable and for sale to low to moderate income folks crater in the past 12 to 18 months as the housing market really didn't stop during COVID, and demand increased and interest rates were still super low. And second, we must recognize the really inextricable connection between housing opportunities and race, especially in Virginia. So just like the state and the rest of the country, Hampton Roads has a wide homeownership gap between white and Black households, a near 30-point difference. And this disparity captures the longstanding impacts of redlining, financial discrimination, predatory lending, and other injustices. And it reflects our inability to make progress to remedy these problems. Next, let's think about seniors. Maybe they want to downsize into one of those starter homes that are the exact same homes that millennials also happen to want. Maybe they just want to live in a low maintenance condo. If they do, for a relatively new one, they're going to have to pay around $2,000 or more per month for that privilege today. That's a lot of money per month, especially for seniors on fixed incomes. And new apartments are expensive to build, and senior communities are obviously no exception. So given the increasing cost, low supply, this really isn't too surprising. But the problem here is that while many retirees may happen to be well off, limited affordable options for seniors means that some have no choice but to age in place. And even if they want to, they might be in homes where accessibility wasn't in mind in the first design. And so we're going to have to think about retrofitting and improving a lot of our homes across the region and across the state to help those seniors age in place, whether they want to or because they're forced to. So now let's take a look at whether our public investments to help low-income folks afford their homes is actually enough. And as I alluded to earlier, it's not. Today, Housing Choice Vouchers, a great program to help low-income renters afford rent in the private market through private landlords, makes homes affordable to more than 45,000 renters across Virginia. These are federal dollars that flow through state and local organizations. And again, many of these households with these vouchers are using them in the private market with private landlords. But for every household with a housing choice voucher, there are at least another 7 who need one because they're cost burdened and low income, but don't have one. So the scale of our resources in the investments that we are making and our policy and our money that we're putting in to housing to help people afford it is very, very small compared to the actual demand, not just in Hampton Roads, but across Virginia and across the country. And finally, I think we have to remember that housing problems can have tremendous impacts, not just on the adults who are trying to struggle with making these choices and finding the resources and finding the home that they can afford, but also on the children that might be in these households. Can you imagine focusing on your homework or trying to make friends when you have no home of your own, or your parents said that you might not have a home tomorrow? Last year in the region, nearly 2,500 students across public schools experienced homelessness or housing instability. And so this definition captures more types of circumstances than traditional point in time homelessness counts might, which you might see in the news. So this includes children who are literally homeless, might be on the street or in a shelter, but also who are doubled up with family or friends, living in hotels or motels, or living in vehicles. And so I don't know about you, but this is not a situation that I find acceptable. So that's a lot of problems. What is going on? Why is our housing market not functioning the way it should? Well, there's really too many reasons to list and not enough time to cover them tonight. Otherwise, we'd be here for the rest of the evening. Housing really is what some sociologists call a wicked problem. There is no single cause and no single solution. Today, our housing problems are intertwined, unpredictable, and contested lots of times. And new problems seem to pop up every single day, like whether Airbnbs and short-term rentals are taking homes away from actual residents. That's something that we don't really have an easy answer for right now and requires more research, let alone to figure out what kind of policy intervention might be necessary to fix that if it is a problem. And so in my opinion, it's misleading for anyone to assert that there is one or two particular issues that are the primary causes of our housing challenges. There's definitely some things that are up front and center, like our low inventory, low supply, simple things like supply and demand. But that once you start to peel away the onion, you find that there's a lot going on underneath the surface that we need to address. And so I think in our panel, we'll have a chance to get into those in some more detail. So housing is complicated for sure, but that doesn't mean it's too complex to figure out solutions. And believe it or not, we already have a pretty good idea of what to do, or at least where to begin. So I'll provide an overview and then we'll let the panel get into some more details. We need a multi-pronged approach to plug all of these holes. And there are many ways that we can intervene for the better. We can work on the supply side to make affordable housing, to literally make more housing that is affordable through reforming our zoning, allowing nonprofits to do development, subsidies, incentives, tax credits. We already do a lot of this. It's just not enough. We can also make housing affordable, make existing housing more affordable through rental assistance directly to tenants, which we also do through housing choice vouchers, or through rent restrictions, increasing minimum wages, home buyer grants, things like that. So overall, there's two big different directions we can attack this problem with lots of different ways within those two approaches. And again, we're already doing a lot of stuff. It just happens to not be enough in most cases. At the local level, there's a wide range of things that we can do. And there's no shortage of ways to make housing work for everybody. And so this list is not exhaustive, to be sure, just a range of examples. And so thinking about it in terms of how difficult a policy may be, but not always how politically difficult it may be, we can encourage the private market to provide homes that are lower cost and more affordable just because of their design and where they happen to be and their density. We can just take advantage of numbers to make the homes more affordable because they're less costly to develop. But that doesn't always create the deep affordability that we need for persons with very limited ability to pay for their homes. We can also embrace innovative solutions like rethinking manufactured housing, which has come a long way in the past 30 or 40 years. Accessory dwelling units, granny flats in your backyard, community land trusts to share equity, cooperatives. We can fill a lot of specific and special needs like the first-time home buyer gap with some of these solutions and really think outside the box and not do the same thing over and over and over again and expect it to work. We can really dig into our local land use and zoning code to make that more inclusive and to incentivize and or require that new development has homes set aside in it for lower income persons. We can do that by giving developers a density bonus or other benefits to make the numbers work, really without subsidy at all. But that's a delicate balance, and sometimes it can backfire on you. And then maybe really the politically tough thing to do in most cases is to actually generate new resources, put money on the table, and allocate funds to help defray the cost of affordable housing development or services. But when you do this at the local level, that means that you as a locality, you as a community, have full control over how to use those funds, and you're not restricted to whatever the federal or state government may be telling you to do or not do. But one thing that we can fix today, because we can't change the world today, but we can do a couple things. We can take a few steps now that will pay off dividends in the long run, and we can rethink how we talk about housing with our family, friends, and neighbors. But it's not easy to talk about housing. Just see how much I'm struggling right now. And so for a number of reasons, it's really troublesome to talk about this issue with others. First, everybody has or needs a home, and so there can be a natural instinct to really protect what we already have. Housing is very, very personal, and rightfully so. Second, even with presented with mounds of evidence to the contrary, some folks will just not cede their personal convictions and dig in their heels. And so people who have high confidence but low competence can make public decision-making hard and make it hard to build support for things that are kind of tough to build political support for. And then all politics is local. Many times the pro or anti-housing camps are not going to sort themselves into traditional left or right party affiliation. So again, funny things happen with housing. Here's an example from Arlington. Arlington County is currently in the midst of a contentious effort by the county and housing advocates to allow some more missing middle housing types in expensive single family neighborhoods, things like duplexes and 3 or 4 unit apartment buildings, things that you see a lot in kind of early 20th century, quaint urban neighborhoods. And so this is just a pure regulatory change to cut the red tape and make less expensive housing types easier for the private market, whether it's a for-profit or nonprofit developer, to build. So let's start zooming in here on the left, looking at this yard sign, probably a pretty common sight in Northern Virginia and maybe some other neighborhoods across Virginia, a yard sign supporting inclusivity and progressive values. A number of these have popped up in the past few years. You pan over to the right, and you can tell that this resident has some particularly strong feelings about the types of homes and the types of people, really, that might be welcome in their neighborhood. So as you might surmise, it takes a little bit more effort to have productive conversations about housing. And so the best way to approach these housing conversations, whether it's with your brother, your sister, your neighbor, whoever, is to first think about the frames that you're going to use. So frames are the choices that we take about how our information is presented. And so we need to have very effective framing to have effective conversations. Know your audience, know what to lead with, choose your words wisely, and sometimes just shut up and leave some things unsaid. Because when you don't choose the right frame, your message can backfire. And so when something backfires on you, it reinforces an audience's existing bias rather than changing some of those assumptions that they have made, perhaps falsely, even when you give them facts and data to support your position. And so this is very, very common. I'm sure it's happened to all of us, but we have some ways to fix it. So like a traditional message like this, you've probably seen this in some nonprofit literature about helping some of their clients. But it can backfire because some people will say, well, it's not my responsibility. They should stop making poor decisions. I shouldn't pay for those mistakes. Or I don't really have any responsibility for this. I feel bad for them, but it's not my job. Just somebody else needs to do it. And so that's tough, right? When you think you have a really good message, but it backfires on you. And so 4 tips for today that you can take away to reframe things effectively are to think about regional fairness. Say things like, we need our housing policies to expand our region's vitality, to attract new jobs. Benefits need to occur to all of us and not just specific people. We need to focus on systems and not personal decision-making, because really the systems are the challenges here, not whether a person decides to live here or there. We need to have proactive explanations, and so hopefully you'll have some of those after tonight. So get your facts in order, and don't take for granted that your audience is in the same place as you are in terms of understanding the issue. And finally, always pivot to and end on solutions. And so that's why I think today's conversation is so important, because we want to talk to you about some of the things that we can advocate for and that work. And so we'll put in the chat right now these two links, because again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole lot of literature and great information out here about this on our website and others that I encourage you all to look at. So finally, to wrap up, what you should remember, since I've covered a lot of ground very quickly and I've already gone over time, affordable is just the start of the conversation. There's a lot more to that word, and a lot more to the word housing than you probably thought. A broken housing market hurts everyone. When a car on 64 gets a flat tire and doesn't pull off to fix it, we're definitely all going to suffer because of that one person's problem. And so we need to fix our housing market to help everybody. And while the list of problems might be long, and it is pretty long, so is our list of solutions. And we have no problem thinking of them and knowing which ones are going to work. And finally, how you talk about housing matters. I can't stress this enough. Frame your messages effectively, and you'll go a lot further than you probably thought. So that's what I would like for you all to take away today and remember as we move into the panel. And again, I want to thank Linda and everybody for the opportunity to speak tonight. And I will now pass it off to Andy to start our panel.
Great, Jonathan. Thank you very much for that presentation that had tons of information and lots of things to think about. So what we're going to do for the balance of the evening tonight is to allow our panelists to talk about some of the issues that Jonathan raised and what's currently being done to address these issues, who can do what in the future. I'm Andy Friedman. I'm very happy to be with you tonight to moderate this important discussion. So it's important to know also that this is a critical topic, not only in our region, but in the state and in the country. We can tell it's an important topic in our region because 400 or more of you registered to hear about this tonight. In addition, pretty much every stakeholder group in the country has identified affordable housing as a crisis. Realtors, home builders, governments, nonprofits have all said that affordability and supply of housing is a crisis that we have to deal with. And even just today, in the front page of the paper, we see that the rents in Chesapeake went up more as a percentage basis than anywhere else in the entire country. It's clearly an important issue. We're very happy that the foundation has seen fit to do this forum. And so we're going to jump right into it by allowing our panelists to answer a couple of questions to get deeper into the subject. So we're going to start with Steve Lawson. And Steve, if you could tell us about your work and how you and your company have created affordable housing, that would be a great way to start us off.
Sure, Andy, and thanks. And also thanks to Jonathan as well for a great overview of what is definitely a complicated issue. Our company got started in the early 1970s when my father began building affordable housing under the HUD Section 236 program, which was kind of the precursor to the tax credit program in a way. He and his team built about a dozen of those communities before that program ended. And then the company transitioned to the low-income housing tax credit program when that was created in 1986. And since then, we've been very fortunate to have been able to build or renovate more than 3,000 apartments in 24 different communities using housing tax credits. And as you saw in Jonathan's presentation, this is really high quality affordable housing, as is most of what's built with housing tax credits. These, I think, are, the breakers of the stereotypes around affordable housing. But we're not the hero here. The low-income housing tax credit program is, and the other resources that are available. But the tax credit program has now been around for 36 years, and it's worked really well because it marries the public sector subsidy on one side with the private investor discipline on the other, both under a really long-term commitment. And since '86, it's created 3.6 million affordable apartments and homes. And that makes it the most successful affordable housing program that our country's ever created. And so it's certainly something we need to encourage and expand if we can convince Congress to do that. That has been on the table, but has not happened just yet.
Thanks, Steve. That's an important point, is that federal resources are a key part of addressing local and regional housing needs. So we'd like to then follow up with Srinita and ask her to share the work that she is doing at the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission to address affordable housing.
Sure. Thank you, Andy. Again, we work with the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. We are one of 21 regional organizations throughout the state of Virginia that concentrates on regional approaches to addressing issues such as affordable housing. Not only do we work with affordable housing initiatives, our organization also looks at our transportation needs, water resources, emergency management, economic planning, and also recycling and water resources as it relates to how do we continue to ensure that our waterways are safe and healthy. In terms of affordable housing, everything that Jonathan said just really echoed the work that we're trying to do in the region. Most of our work is in a couple of different departments, but we also staff support the Hampton Roads Housing Consortium, which is a separate non-501c3 regional organization that is a collaboration of our nonprofits, our HUD-approved housing counseling agencies, our housing authorities, as well as our lenders, realtors, and developers that are really passionate about affordable housing and how that we work collectively together for the region. In addition to that work, we also provide technical assistance to most of our localities. When I say the Hampton Roads region, our organization covers all 17 jurisdictions in Hampton Roads, which encompasses about 1.7 million if you look at our entire footprint. So we provide any collaborative and technical support to our localities, and we help them look at where we can kind of partner together if we have several organizations or several localities working on the same options. We see that working together, we can be a much better cost-effective approach. One of the future programs that we're really excited about, and it really just delves right into what we're talking about tonight, is that we're looking to create our first regional housing assessment for this region. We have had several segments of a couple of cities that have come together to look at how housing is in our area, but never have we done a true gap analysis and housing assessment of our entire region. And what this will encompass is looking at ways that we can collaborate together, taking a full snapshot of all the services and programs that we have out for our consumers and residents, and look at what other gaps of how we can work together more regionally in some areas, how we can look at best practices in other areas that are a little bit like us. What we have found in our region is that we're quick to get on social media, we're quick to get on the website and look at what Los Angeles is doing, what Atlanta is doing, even Northern Virginia. But Hampton Roads is very specific and very unique. Our waterways make us unique. Our transit system gives us a few impediments to some of these things. So this initiative will really allow us to really see who we are and look at ways that we can increase knowledge of what programs are already out here for residents. We always see that as a huge problem in our region, is how do we get the services out that are available to the people in need? So this forum, again, with the help of Dr. Rice, with the foundation, the first thing we're seeing is that we need to reach out of the silos of housing and make sure that we have our foundations involved, as well as our hospital systems, our economic development partners, to look at housing a little bit more holistically across other disciplines. So this forum speaks to what we're trying to do for affordable housing in the region.
Great, thank you so much, Srinita. Another really important issue that was raised by Jonathan in his presentation are the non-equitable impacts of past housing policies on specific and minority populations. So we're going to ask each panelist to talk about the issue of achieving equity as we try to address affordable housing. And we're going to start having Steve talk about that.
Thanks, Andy. To achieve more equity in housing policy, I think we really need to rethink our zoning and land use policy. Fundamentally, a big part of the problem boils down to economics, Econ 101, supply and demand. It's really just as simple as that. For many decades now, we have structurally limited the supply of housing, and we're now paying for it. Rising prices and rising rents are the direct result of high demand in the face of limited supply. Large lot single-family zoning has been the default for most municipalities for many decades, and that's an inherently exclusive policy. It favors high-priced homes over more affordable ones. And instead, what we need is more housing of all types, but especially affordable housing and close to jobs as well. We need a new paradigm around housing. Municipalities have traditionally looked at housing as something they've got to limit, but collectively, as a city or a town or a state, we have an obligation to the people that live and work in our communities. And that obligation is to create enough housing to keep the market working. Unlike what's happening right now. If we don't allow enough housing to be built, prices just rise to levels that are unaffordable to our working families. And then what we do is we force them to commute long distances to try to find a decent affordable housing if they can find it at all. And so we really need to look at the supply of housing as another service that municipalities need to provide. I mean, we always make sure the trash is picked up and the water is flowing, but I think we also have to consider that we need to make sure that enough housing gets built as well. And after all, housing is infrastructure. It's also an economic development issue. Every city has an economic development department, or all cities of any size. And the companies we're trying to attract look at the availability and affordability of housing. And our cities are less competitive if we don't address this issue. And then our kids have fewer economic opportunities, fewer jobs. And keep in mind that housing is just where those jobs go home to sleep at night. You can't have one without the other.
Thanks very much, Steve. We'll let Shanita talk about this issue next.
Yes, I echo everything that Steve mentioned, and it also goes back to the presentation that Jonathan gave us, is how we look at housing. And if we're looking at equity, we have to really rethink housing as just something that is for the haves and the have-nots. It has to be something that's looked upon that if you correct and you cure the situation for your community, everyone benefits from that. So when we look at equity, we look at, we cannot continue to have school systems that you have one high performing school system in one district that moves everyone centered around that school system, and then the other school systems and communities suffer. So in all things, we have to look at what is considered equitable for all. We had a very rich and robust conversation with our Citizen Advisory Committee, just talking about housing and economic development, and also educational opportunities came into the mix as we were talking about affordable housing. And one of the committee members said, how are we going to house the engineers that are trying to work at Wallops Island? And our housing specialist chimed in and says, we need to make sure that we're having housing for the engineers that work for Wallops Island, as well as the janitors that clean the floors at Wallops Island. So what we have coined at the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission is a little bit more than just affordable housing. We call it adequate housing for all. So if you're a senior looking for universal design, and looking for something that's equity. How do we build those communities that everyone can find the housing choice that they need at the stage of their life? So it goes back to, as Steve said, in terms of zoning and making sure that we're self-correcting some things that were done incorrectly in the past, but that we're making sure that we're looking at housing options across the board for where you are in your lifestyle, in that part of your life at that point.
Thank you, Shanita. And then we'll let Jonathan talk about this.
Sure. I will ditto everything that Steve and Shanita have said. I really can't add much more, but I think it's very important to remember that the inequities and the disparities that we see today aren't because of an accident. They didn't just happen. They were the direct result of racist decisions and policies that we still live with today and are still embedded in a lot of our land use and zoning and attitudes, unfortunately. And so we're not going to get out of it just by sitting passively and hoping the market will correct itself. Yes, we need to change our land use to be less restrictive, to open up new types of housing. That absolutely has to happen to help everybody. But it's necessary but insufficient. And so we need to make sure that when we think about housing programs and designing them and orienting them towards who benefits and who are we really prioritizing here, we need to focus on who has been given the least and the toughest challenges and has faced the most discrimination because of prior actions by people who came before us and in some cases are still here with us today. So I think it's just very important to be proactive and to remember that it will take intentional decisions and investments in these communities to make any sort of progress.
Thanks, Jonathan. It really is a critical thing that there's a lot of work to be done on. So next we're going to talk about potential regional priorities. I'm going to ask both Steve and Shanita about this one, which is if you could identify one or two of the most important ways which we could address this issue here in Hampton Roads. And we'll start with Shanita.
Okay. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to give you two. Listening to the conversation, I just want to make sure that what we have done in terms of planning and in terms of how we look at our region is that we have developed and we have prioritized things in a vacuum and not really understood that the intersection of housing intersects with health disparities. It intersects with our educational opportunities. It also intersects with economic development. And how do we attract more corporations to our community if we're unable to house them? So for me, the first priority would be to understand that we have to have more people around the table than just our housers. So this conversation has to go to our public school systems, to our economic development, to our health and human services partners to really understand that addressing housing means we're deconcentrating poverty. We're looking at higher housing, higher educational attainment that we can have. So I think our biggest priority right now is making sure we have the right people around the table and that we are not doing the types of planning that we have done in the past in a vacuum. The second part, I think, is really getting a snapshot of prioritizing what we have on the ground, understanding the programs and services that we do have, what's working, what's not working, and where do we go from there before we bring on any new initiatives and services. We have to know where we are right now if we know where we want to go in the future with housing in general.
That's a really good point. Thanks for both of those, Shanita. And Steve, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Shanita makes an excellent point, and I really look forward to the regional housing assessment that is part of the HRPDC's efforts right now. To me, the most important step is to increase the supply of housing, and especially at the affordable end of the spectrum. To do that, I think we need to incentivize or require municipalities to allow enough housing to first correct the deficit that we have. And I think this regional housing assessment would help us better identify that deficit. But the market's telling us we have a deficit. But after we correct that, then we need to entitle enough new housing to keep up with population and job growth. We're always trying to get new jobs, and we succeed at that in lots and lots of areas. But those jobs need homes. I saw a statistic a couple of weeks ago that speaks directly to the supply issue that we're having. Through our zoning, most areas have limited the supply of housing, but the Great Recession really made it worse. If you look at it just by decades, in the decade following the Great Recession, which is the decade of the 2010s, as a country, we built half as many single-family homes in that decade as we did in each of the 5 previous decades. So this is another reason why we have record low levels of inventory in the market right now and why prices are so high. So supply, I think, is the answer to that.
Thanks for that, Steve. And that's another thing to think about is how do localities get incentivized, and is there a role for the state in making that happen? But that's a key issue, is to catch up with the supply. So the next thing we wanted to talk about is for all of our audience who may already be wanting to be involved in this and to do something, we'd like each of you to talk about how people can get involved. Are there forums? Are there organizations working on it? Or can individuals do things on their own? So we're going to start with Jonathan on that and then go to Sharnita and Steve. Jonathan.
Sure. Thanks, Andy. And so, Steve and Sharnita know, your backyard better than I do. And so my recommendation is pretty generic, and that's just to be a good neighbor. Don't be afraid of new housing that you may hear about happening, in your neighborhood or nearby. Don't have kind of an immediate, reaction to it that, might be based in fear. Do your research, listen to what housing advocates and folks like Steve and Sharnita and Andy were saying about this. Talk to your neighbors, talk to your church group, your book club, your civic association, and just be a reasonable voice in those rooms when conversations about housing or development come up, because often they are very opinionated and heated, and unfortunately not based in a lot of facts. And so I encourage everybody, if you haven't already, please go to our website or just email me, pick up the phone and call me if you have questions at any level. I'm happy to address them or provide advice. But at the end of the day, use your head, be a good neighbor, and remember these challenges that we all have to solve together.
Thanks, Jonathan. Sharnita.
Same thing Jonathan said. I think it's knowledge is power, understanding at the local level what your locality is involved with, ensuring that if they have a comprehensive plan or their consolidated plan is up, that you're going into those public hearings, voicing your opinion, and just learning about what's going on in your community. I will also say that even if you're not involved with housing directly, if you're a nurse, if you're in any other field, talk with your employer about housing options and how they can incentivize that as an option for you. So we have seen some creative things done with health care systems and with private employers offering down payment and closing costs, offering other rental things, and for their corporations to get involved in the process. So I think that we're going to have to really look at creative ways of securing affordable housing in our region and creative ways of housing each other. That hasn't been traditional. So relying on the status quo as it relates to funding may not work for us in the future. So really being creative and making sure that you're educating yourself and you're bringing additional partners around the table when you talk about housing.
Great, thank you. And we'll go to Steve.
Yeah, that's absolutely great advice, Sharnita. I also think along those same lines of getting businesses involved, housing is now for the first time gotten on the radar of our chambers of commerce. That's how big of an issue this is. And our business leaders can bring that to the forefront as well. What we can do as individuals is inform ourselves inform ourselves about what's being proposed to be built in our city. Every city has a comprehensive plan. It's updated every 5 years, and they all have a chapter on housing. And you'll probably find the word affordable in that chapter in at least a dozen places and lots of other places elsewhere in that document. Where that gets translated onto the ground is, I think, what we have to look at. We need to demand that our city council or our board of supervisors take that seriously. Show up to hearings and say yes when other people are saying no with a knee-jerk response. And at the end of the day, I think it really comes back to this fairness concept that Jonathan mentioned earlier. And this is the work that the Frameworks Institute has done as well. We need to think about what kind of community we want to live in. We want to be a community that strives to create housing opportunities for everybody that works in our community, or do we want to live in a community that tells our working families that they've got to drive to another city, or in some cases another state, to find decent and affordable housing? To me, it's clear that we want to be the former rather than the latter.
Thank you very much for that, Steve. Yeah, there's a lot of activity on housing going on right now. And most governments are working on the housing issue. Just today at an election day around the country, people were voting for bond issues to raise more money for affordable housing. So there is a lot of activity and there are lots of ways to get involved. And kind of as a follow-up to that, Jonathan, we understand Housing Forward Virginia has some plans to do work here in our region coming up. Could you talk about that for a second?
Sure, thanks, Andy. So we've had the privilege of doing some work for James City County and the Williamsburg Health Foundation over the past few years, but we really haven't had the chance to hop off the peninsula and go a little further east. And so next year we will be working with Virginia Tech in Virginia Beach to help the city update their housing plan. So we're looking forward to that work, and we'll help them try to reorient some of the policy solutions that they may want to implement or look at implementing over the next few years. And so if you're in Virginia Beach, stay tuned for that. And then second, we have a large initiative planned for next year that we really want to take across the state about the connections between zoning and land use, which you've heard us talk a lot about tonight, and specifically racial equity, segregation, and economic opportunity, because all of those things are very much linked together. And it's important to address all of those when we talk about policy solutions. And so this is something that we've been building toward over the past year or so. And we want these to be regional conversations. It's really tough to have that kind of conversation that's specific to local policy. You know, localities have the role and have the power to regulate their land uses. And so we realize that conversation has to happen at least the regional level. And so we've been talking with some folks down there and hope to begin that work in Hampton Roads early next year. And so I know the Community Foundation will keep everybody posted as more details come out about that after the new year.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. That's going to be a great way to for people who are interested to follow up on this forum and get involved in that as it begins. So really, we're at the kind of the wrap up, and we'd like each of our panelists to share with our participants one nugget of wisdom or your best idea or best suggestion to take with them as they go back after this forum and figure out what's next for them and how they can best contribute to progress. So we're going to start again with Shanita.
Great. Thanks, Andy. This has been a great conversation tonight. A lot of nuggets of information. And one of the things that Jonathan had mentioned is that even in housing, we don't know everything about housing. So every time we have these conversations, we learn more and more from each other. So my nugget is to continue to educate yourself. I know that Dr. Rice and the Community Foundation will be providing some links after this presentation. So I strongly encourage people to go to those links, make sure that you're getting your information from reputable sources, and keep the dialogue going so that we can continue to push forward and finally get to some solutions for housing in this region. We're a different beast than other areas in Virginia and in the United States, and we have to do things that are going to suit us. So my thing is continue to have that education and continue to keep talking.
Great, thanks, Shanita. Steve, I think I may have said it, but we're open to hearing it.
Yeah, thanks, Shanita. That was very well said as well. I'm going back to the supply. We need to build more housing. We need to build more high quality housing of all types by builders of every stripe. Nonprofit, for-profit, yellow profit, purple profit. It doesn't matter who builds it, but we need more to get the supply and demand back in balance. And don't forget that housing creates jobs. If you dig into the numbers, building housing contributes positively to our economy over both the short and the long term. The National Association of Home Builders, our team of PhD economists has run these numbers, and the impacts both in the first year while a community is under construction are huge. And then every year after that, the annual recurring impacts of building housing are positive. So we need more.
Great, thank you. And Jonathan, you get the last word here, I think.
Oh, tall order. I'll try my best. Well, I think despite the fact that we've talked about housing being challenging to have conversations about because it's so nuanced and can be, very personally charged, I want to leave you with this. A few weeks ago, the Virginia Housing Alliance, our state housing advocacy organization, which I encourage all of you to Google if you'd like to learn how to engage with your state representatives about housing, they commissioned a statewide poll of registered voters. And they found that 66% of voters support less restrictive zoning regulations to make housing more affordable and to open up more diverse housing options. 73% would support a candidate that is openly pro-housing and wants to make housing more affordable. And 80% of registered voters agree that wide housing choices in a community and across a region help local economies. So despite everything you may hear, despite those contentious public meetings you may see about new housing being proposed, people support housing. People realize how important housing is. And so remember that generally more people want housing than don't want housing. And so it's more popular than you think because people know at the end of the day how important it is. So always remember that you've got the majority of folks support behind you.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. I think I'd just like to also say that our region has done some effective work as a region in addressing housing issues of different kinds. And it's very possible we could do so again. There's lots of advantages to doing that. So having the foundation have this as a regional discussion, I think is really important. And all the things that Shanita said about bringing in all the right people to the table to have this discussion is going to be critical as we try to develop ways to follow up to this forum. So it's a little bit earlier than we said it would be, which we're going to give back some time to our audience. So in right away, I'm going to turn it back to Linda for some concluding remarks, and we'll go from there. Thank you. Go ahead, Linda.
Thank you so much. I've learned so much tonight, and I appreciate each one of you. I can't tell you how much this means to the foundation for you to provide your expertise and your commitment to us. It energized me, and I'm sure that it energized all of our participants. I think the one thing that I heard from all of you is stay informed, stay informed, stay informed, and talk to others. So if we can all remember that, that's one of the most important things we learned tonight. So after tonight's program, you will find resources related to affordable housing on the Hampton Roads Community Foundation website, along with a recording of this event, Jonathan's slide presentation, and full bios of our presenters, so that we hope you will take advantage of these resources, and we will replenish that site regularly as Shanita, Steve, Jonathan, and Andy send us information, or there's more information available in our community. So please take advantage of those resources. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we hope you have a wonderful evening.